Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to come in here, join KFAS and the distinguished colleagues here, and sharing some sort of my observation to the country by 2025. I'm a little bit, the pressure because it's a bigger audience. There's a lot of celebrities, and particularly I'd like to thank the moderator for his very positive description of what the China will be by 2025. But I have to say his observation is too much rosy. From the Chinese perspective, by 2025, what the China will be. So we're still very, very worried. I don't think some sort of such a very rosy prospect is completely assured. So I'm very happy to just share some sort of my thoughts with everybody here about China's global security impact by 2025. First of all, let me begin. So what China will be look like 10 years later on? Yes, it's quite likely. In economic terms, China's GDP will surpass the US. But I don't think it's also completely possible because China's economy now is truly hitting some snag. For example, China's economic growth is really slowing down. Then most of Chinese feel a little bit nervous about the future's economic growth rate. China could just repeat some sort of very marvelous, high growth rate in the past 3 decades. I have to say that China's response is very complicated. On the one hand, we really love to see the China's economy will be healthy, but on the other hand, we'd like what? We'd like the fresh air, secure food. We also like some sort of a declining gap of economic inequity. So if the China's economic growth will losing some sort of a dynamic as we did in the past 2 decades, I have to tell you, it may be a good news for my country because we recognize economic growth rate, yes, mean our income rising, but it doesn't mean our life quality is getting better. So China's development has never been more some sort of attractive story in the global context. That means in the coming 1 decade, one of the leading task force for Chinese government to work on is not just how to say crazily, just to work on the China's economic marvelous story. Most important things, how economy could be well balanced in some way, just to continue to, develop. So then GDP as one of the indicator, yes, it's possible China will surpass the US, but it doesn't mean all. The GDP is just one of the indicators. We can measure China's power and stress. But on the other hand, the GDP indicator doesn't mean anything. For example, if the China's growth rate will be declined to annual base of 5%, then we'll see such a surpassing will be delayed. Then what the China really, really matters? In GDP terms, surpassing the US mean everything? No. I don't think it's a very, very amazing story if the China's economy could be stronger than US. Most important things, we have to create more jobs. We have to innovate in the Chinese technology. We have to update the China's economic competence at the world, community. So that things will be more important and more significant. So then don't just always overbelieve GDP-driven China's strength with enhancement will mean everything for my country. So we're very cautiously looking to some sort of such a, power transition just simply in the term of GDP. From my perspective, GDP is one of the indicators, but it's not so significant. If we turn on to some sort of a security realm, then we will see more complicated story. It's some sort of a cartoon from New York Times. It tells us how confrontational China and the United States will be in the coming years, because Chinese Navy is getting bigger, then China now is a little bit overstretching in Western Pacific ring. So coming days, there will be a new Cold War between US and China, or US and China could get along well with each other. Things also has never been more tricky. So there is a lot of complaints we can very adequately hear from the American community, policy community, academic community. They always say probably China will be getting more aggressive. So 10 years later on, the China-US relations will be more confrontational or will be stay the same. I mean, we're a competitor, but at the same time, we're a cooperator. So one of the, foretelling the futures of China's global security should start off some sort of cool-head analysis of China-US relations. Then over the South China Sea issue, I see it's one of the leading sparks. Someone say the South China Sea's friction and tension now is sitting at the centerpiece of international security because it's only source of a future great powers tension. So then how the South China Sea will affect the China-US relations? It will meeting the bilateral relations over to some sort of growing, escalating, military tension. Then the South China Sea will cause the geopolitical split. What's our answer? What's our, some sort of, foretelling story about the power relations trajectory? So I think it's a key concern. Then another thing we also have to have in mind is about economic and security cracks. Yes, in the economic term, China will be getting bigger and more stronger. But the problem doesn't mean China will be a leading driver of the regional security in East Asia. The reason is very simple. As I mentioned, China's economic clouds will not be automatically just translated into geopolitical games. So American-centered online system will unbelievably stable. On the other hand, we also see U.S. now is reaping some sort of bonus from China's rise, because most of our regional members feel a little bit worried about China's future, so now is decisively leaning toward the U.S. In the coming one decade, such a things will dramatically change? No. So futures China's global security impact should be very adequately based on this assumption. The China's rise will not stir at the realignment and realliance in the region. So security order is stable. Some sort of, power relations in terms of its basic, the contour remain very expected. So I don't think in the coming 10 years, China-US relations will significantly change. Yes, we can be a little bit worried about what kind of a nature China-US relations will be. You will be significantly changed. You will be getting more, confrontational. No, I think so far there's no sign could just underline such a very pessimistic expectation. Yes, from Americans' perspective, look at this. It's Pacific Commander, Chief Commander Admiral Harry Harris, the comment to the China's land reclamation in South China Sea. So he very pointedly say what China is doing with the land reclamation is China attempting to building sand Great Wall at the sea. So maybe 10 years later, then we will see some sort of China's Great Wall now is extending in the Western Pacific. But I don't think it's a truly very, adequate assessment Yes, China won't build the island. China won't expand the maritime presence. But one of the reasons is Beijing believes we're later comer. It's the Philippines, it's Vietnam, it's Malaysia, including the Taiwan. One after another, those guys have the airstrips, have the military hubs at the South China Sea. But Beijing hadn't got anything just like this. So now China is getting bigger. We should be at a little bit better position to safeguard China's interests at the South China Sea. So then we're a little bit stretched out. But it doesn't mean land reclamation will be automatically leading to the militarization of South China Sea. The reason is very simple. I think a leading constraint to the China's foreign policy and the security strategy will be very, we say, similar to what kind of challenges facing today's China. It will not be easy to overcome for Beijing. I think that leading constraint is China is by nature a transformative power. Even by the 2025, that nature will not, we say, overwhelmingly change. On the other hand, it's still a formidable task to decide what kind of China we could be. So what makes the difference between the US and China? I don't think it's military strength. I don't think it's technology innovation. I don't think it's some sort of a soft power attraction. I think if we go in deeper into some sort of variations, which now is really, deciding some sort of differentiation between the two powers, is US has a great political, economic, social system, but China hasn't yet. I think it's leading panic for my generation of Chinese intellectuals. I think it's also a big challenge for today's China when we'd like to embrace Chinese dream. So in coming 1 decade, Beijing will continue to struggle for transformation, for transition. That kind of things will decide the future of China's international behavior. Yes, we have a very contending theory to explain some sort of domestic factor and how it will implicate China's foreign policy. Someone say that will drive China over to some sort of a more assertive policy because China have to add to domestic legitimacy by some sort of, we say, risk-taking policy internationally. But I have to say such an assumption is really groundless because China is huge. China is most populated. Chinese people also has never been more mobilized. If such a risk-taking policy really fail, what will happen to my country? China probably will fragment it. That's a really some sort of Western nightmare. I think the mainstream of the Chinese, they like to stay away from, they like to avoid. So whatever the Xi Jinping administration's foreign policy is controversial because a lot of China watchers just believe the Xi Jinping policy has said bye-bye to the Deng Xiaoping's low-profile approach. Then China just switch the course and just turning on some sort of a more aggressive international behavior. But I have to say partly it is, but partly it is completely not. So future, if China couldn't just very successfully and also very organizedly getting through the domestic transition, I have to tell you, China remains a vulnerable power by nature. 2025's, the prospect doesn't mean it's a breaking point for China's such a historical trajectory. So we should put the hope on the Beijing still is cool-headed. So we recognize what's a leading threat to China. So then China will be some sort of, we say, reluctant cooperator with the US. For example, John Kerry yesterday at the AIF ministerial meeting strongly urging China to stop all, the island construction, land reclamation, and facilities, building up at China's artificial land at South China Sea. I don't think his suggestion will be well echoed in Beijing, because we consider such an island construction is really serve China's interest, is legitimate, and is reasonable. Then this constructed island could also be used as a common good for region to just endorse the South China Sea, rescuing and some sort of incidents, the searching. But the problem is, if the U.S. just trying to force China to pull back, I don't think China also will respond very positively. So yes, it will be some sort of big barrier for U.S.-China to disclose the future ground bargaining. How regional security hot points could be well approached from some sort of a shared responsibility of two great powers. But on the other hand, there's no way such some sort of South China Sea driven, the friction will out of control. Okay, I think another very leading indicator to measure up China's security pact is, in one way, the continuity of China's regional diplomatic economic activism could be lasting. Then we will see in the past 10 years, China did a lot. China initiated a lot. So from the South China, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, six-party talk, China ASEAN, China Koreans, FTA, over to AIB, and the One Belt One Road initiative. That kind of China regional engagement proved to be positive, but it doesn't mean China will continue to do that, because now whatever China initiates, whatever China now is embarking on, it always allows a lot of controversy. So I think it's some sort of regional challenges. In the coming 10 years, how can we just maintain some sort of such a great diplomatic momentum to drive China more positively and more broadly, just engage in the regional common goods? It's not just completely, assured. But on the other hand, there is a bigger concern. What's China's real intention? It's also some sort of source of a bigger speculation. So my American colleague, Michael Pillsbury, just published his very great book. This book's topic is 100 Years Marathon. It's describing some sort of China's very deeply hidden and also history-rooted some sort of strategic intention. Beijing sooner or later will squeeze the U.S. out of the Asian Pacific. I think I have to say it's an exaggeration. If the U.S. and China, U.S. and other regional members, they always just get drunk in some sort of such a misperception, probably the future security interaction will be a little bit flimsy and stuck. But the problem is, we also have another very alarming thought. My colleague at the Princeton University, Tom Christensen, he just published another book. It's a China Challenge. He still very strongly assumes the coming years, China's leading work for the Beijing found no way to disload is still assured domestic transition. So China's foreign policy will be risk-averse rather than risk-taking. Okay, let me quickly get to my conclusion. First of all, I don't think by the 2025, the China's security role will be historically changed. China's power projection capability remain very limited. For Beijing, the leading fear and worry sweeping through the domestic, the policy agenda it remains some sort of, we say, domestic, internal, rather than external. But anyway, China's security role will be dual. On the one hand, China's diplomatic activism will be some sort of very important source for a region to thrive, for a region to better connect it and overcome some sort of challenge in a way, collective and regionalized. But on the other hand, China will be doomed to be the source of instability in the region because China is big. China wants to stretch out. China also would like to just come after China's interest in a way more Chinese. So what will be exactly, we say, forecasted by the 2025, China's security impact will be still controversy. I really hope Beijing could take a good look at such a big controversy, and on the one hand, make China still very positively engaged in the region and contributing to some sort of a shared prosperity and development. But on the other hand, Beijing also should pay more attention to undercut some sort of the China stir caused by a rising China. If we can just very conceivably foresee that way, then my country will be getting better, stronger, and more amicable. Thanks.